Hello and welcome to Sister in Crime's Bouchercon panel, What Does a Police Procedural Look Like in 2021? I'm Stephanie Gayle, the Vice President of the National Board of Sisters in Crime, and I'm grateful to live in and create on the lands of the Pawtucket and Massachusetts peoples. On behalf of my panelists, Faye Snowden is humbled and honored to create on the lands of the Yakutsk Indians. Rachel Howzell Hall creates on Chamush lands. Bruce Robert Coffin writes on the lands of the Wabanaki and Abenaki nations. Joanna Schaffhausen lives and creates on the lands of the Ponkapoag and Wampanoag, and Hillary Davidson resides and works in the lands of the Munsee Lenape. So let's first meet our panelists in reverse alphabetical order because we're fun like that. Faye Snowden writes noir mysteries, poems, and short stories from her home in Northern California. Her short story, One Bullet, One Vote, was selected as one of the best American mystery and suspense stories of 2021. Her novels include the Richard G. Marvel Detective Series and the Louisiana Killing Series, featuring homicide detective Raven Burns. A Killing Rain will be out next year. Faye has a master's in English literature and has been awarded several writing fellowships. She is a member of Mystery Writers of America and Sisters in Crime, where she serves as board secretary for SinC National. Next, we have Joanna Schaffhausen, who is the award-winning author of the Ellery Hathaway Mystery Series and the new thriller Gone for Good. She has a doctorate in psychology, which reflects her long-standing interest in the brain, how it develops, and the many ways it can go wrong. Previously, she worked as an editorial producer for ABC News, writing for programs such as World News Tonight, Good Morning America, and 2020. She is the current vice president for the New England chapter of Mystery Writers of America, and she lives in the Boston area with her husband, daughter, and an obstreperous basset hound named Winston. Rachel Howzell Hall is the critically acclaimed author and Los Angeles Times Book Prize finalist for And Now She's Gone, which was also nominated for the Lefty, Barry, Seamus, and Anthony Awards, and the Audible Originals bestseller, How It Ends. A New York Times bestselling author of The Good Sister with James Patterson, Rachel is an Anthony International Thrillers writer and Lefty Award nominee, and the award of They All Fall Down, Land of Shadows, Skies of Ash, Trail of Echoes, and City of Saviors in the Detective Eloise Norton series. Her next thriller, These Toxic Things, out in September 21, received a starred review from Publishers Weekly that called the novel cleverly plotted and a refreshing take on the serial killer theme. Hillary Davidson is the best-selling author of 7 crime novels, including One Small Sacrifice, Blood Always Tells, and The Damage Done. Her fiction has won 2 Anthony Awards and a Derringer Award, and her short stories have appeared in Thuglit, Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine, and Mystery Tribune. Her latest novel, Her Last Breath, has been named one of the best books of summer 2021 by Parade Magazine, Travel and Leisure, and the Toronto Star. Originally from Toronto, she's lived in New York City since October 2001. Bruce Robert Coffin is the award-winning author of the best-selling Detective Byron mystery series. Former detective sergeant with more than 27 years in law enforcement, he supervised all homicide and violent crime investigations for Maine's largest city. Following the terror attacks of September 11, 2001, Bruce spent 4 years investigating counterterrorism cases for the FBI, earning the Director's Award, the highest award a non-agent can receive. Winner of Killer Nashville's Silver Falchion Award for Best Procedural and the Maine Literary Award for Best Crime Novel, Bruce was also a finalist for the Agatha Award for Best Contemporary Novel. His short fiction appears in several anthologies, including Best American Mystery Stories, 2016. Thank you, everyone, for coming. You are all very well regarded. You have so many achievements, and a person with less self-esteem than I would be intimidated. Don't worry about me.
It's funny, just as you were doing my introduction, my golden retriever that I was saying often comes in to say hello. She just walked in and started drinking water very loudly. So.
Impeccable timing.
It wouldn't be a Zoom meeting without that, you know?
It truly wouldn't. So it's a pleasure to be with you all, and proof that it is possible to schedule a panel with 6 people in at least 3 different time zones. Our panel today is What Does a Police Procedural Look Like in 2021? And for those of you who are a little unfamiliar with all of the ways that we name different genres and subgenres within mystery, A police procedural is any mystery work that features a police protagonist or largely takes place within a police setting. I wrote 3 such books in the Thomas Lynch Idol series, and our panelists have written many, many more. So today I thought we'd start with a softball, or at least I hope it's a softball. Why did you first decide to write a police procedural rather than, say, a private sleuth or an amateur detective? And this is a question for everyone, so if you're ready, just raise your hand. Rachel.
My series features Eloise Norton, who is an LAPD homicide detective. And one thing that attracted me to procedurals is the organization of it. I'm an organized freak. I like keep journals and cross things out, and I'm that person. So I like when I first started writing in this genre, the stuff that I had to hit, the things that I knew that had to be there. That was easy entree for me. And I wanted also to see a woman cop in my part of Los Angeles. We had Harry Bosch in Hollywood. We had Walter Mosley on the East Side. Unless it was Paula Woods' Charlotte Justice, there were no Black female cops in the Black part of LA that, was my home and is still my home. So, the need to organize and the need to see contemporary Black women in this structure, that drove me.
Great. Who else? All right, Hillary.
Just put up the hand. So I would say for me, it was maybe a little bit in reaction to having written an amateur sleuth first. So my first 3 books were the Lily Moore series, where you have a travel writer who has no sleuthing skills beyond nosiness, maybe, to guide her. And there are some police that appear in the book, some characters, but they're more in the background. I mean, they are not the focus of the story at all. And after that, I went on to write a standalone that was more of a psychological thriller. And I felt, I guess, like I'm interested in telling stories from different perspectives. And because I felt like I can never say thoroughly, but to my satisfaction at that point, it pretty thoroughly explored amateur sleuthing. I really wanted to try something completely different, to actually sort of put the focus on the cops. And the books, the 2 books that I've done that are police procedurals are told from multiple perspectives. So you're not just getting the police perspective. You also have the perspective of the main perp and some different people. But it was just like a really different way of exploring the story and just focusing on an entirely different world.
Great. Faye?
Yeah, so I wasn't as intentional as you all were, and I didn't even realize I was writing a police procedural. I actually started with a question: what would happen if a daughter of a serial killer became a cop? And then I just kind of explored from there, and it ended up, because she was a cop, I wanted to make sure that things were right, and so I did as much research as I could in order to kind of incorporate some of those elements. I think I'm learning is considered to be a police procedural. Yeah.
All right. Joanna?
I'll go. I grew up on police procedurals. On television there was Law and Order and Hill Street Blues, this sort of thing. And then reading like Ed McBain, I read all of those. And then later, of course, the Bosch series that Rachel alluded to. And they just made sense to my brain. Like there's a crime and, the investigators come in and they try to solve it. And I also thought it was just a really interesting choice as a human to sign up to see the worst of humanity all the time on purpose. Struck me as a noble pursuit. And even if since then, some issues with policing have changed the way that I feel about procedurals and the way I write them, I do still think there is that nobility at heart, especially in fictional detectives that you see. and I'm sure in some real ones as well.
Great. Bruce.
I didn't really set out to start writing a procedural. I honestly, I had taken a 30-year hiatus from writing. Mm-hmm. And when I finally sat down and started putting fingers to keys, that's what came out of me. I think probably subconsciously, I realized that I'd spent a lot of time being bribed by breakfast and coffee by my writer friends in Maine. And it was generally to pick my brain for the way police procedure actually works. And I think I probably was thinking, hey, I know a little about this. Maybe I can write something that would be helpful that people might want to read. So that's really how it started.
So what you really did is you stole their breakfast money by taking their readers from them.
Right. Maybe I was learning from them and not the other way around. Who knows?
Yeah. All right. Now it is a hardball, and Joanna alluded to this. Given the spate of recorded police attacks on people, particularly Black citizens, that have too often resulted in deaths, how do you feel about writing police procedurals? Did you ever think, I want to go back to amateur sleuths, or maybe I should consider writing cozies? Or did recent events in some way deepen your resolve to write police procedurals because of how you came to them? Rachel.
I wrote Lou Norton intentionally because of, all that's happening with police now is not a surprise to Black and Brown communities. It's always been. LAPD is known for being a racist organization since its inception. So this is nothing new. Mm-hmm. And I would say most writers of color who write cops are very, they've never romanticized a cop. My answer to that would be creating Lou Norton, who grew up in the neighborhood that she polices, and having her be our eyes to both sides. She is there to solve problems, but she's also there to help the people who have been demonized and abused by the LAPD. I think that I stopped writing Lou not because of what was going on with the police. I wrote it because, economics. No one, the publisher just couldn't support it anymore because of, whatever reason. But if I went back to being able to write Lou Norton, it will be the same. Mm-hmm. There's a problem, how community policing helps with that problem, how hiring police folks of color helps with that problem, and kind of coming to address all that in a smaller bites rather than the big sure. Police problem. Helping people in the community and solving their problems is how I chose to talk about community policing. So yeah.
Okay. Hillary.
I would say I didn't go into it with a view of the police being inherently heroic. I would say that the two lead characters, the two detectives, Sterling and Mendoza, are amazing cops. But in the books, you see them have ugly run-ins with other cops over issues of racism and homophobia. It's kind of baked into the books, and it's not meant to demonize, police or anything like that. But if you just as writers, I think a lot of us know people who work, in some aspect of policing, and you hear these stories from them. I have heard these stories, and I know firsthand some stories too, things that have happened to people in my family. That make me suspicious of cops. It's not to say that cops are bad, but if you don't depict that, if you don't depict the conflict in an organization where some people are very happy with things as they are, and other people, like what Rachel was saying, they want to make it inclusive. They want to bring people of color on board. They want to do these different things. You have an incredible amount of tension going on right now in police forces. And I think if you're writing a police procedural now, part of your job is to represent what's going on behind the scenes on the force, and not just, the details of a particular crime that's being solved.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would echo, both of the things that Rachel and Hillary said. I've been under contract to write multiple police procedurals. So, I have to find a way as I'm watching the horrors unfold to figure out how I can go forward with some kind of story. I think for me, I was never naive enough to imagine that police forces were free of racism. I remember the LA riots. I've heard the stories and not just the racism angle, just like in my hometown, a woman called up to report that she was raped and the police didn't believe her. And then they crank called her back. Like these kind of stories I've, heard, but like I'm sitting there trying to write my current novel. And it felt like every day I opened the paper and it was how, the Boston police had been protecting a child molester who was head of their police union. And, oh yeah, the new police commissioner, he's a wife beater. And they've been covering that up too. And it's like the systemic aspect of it is hard for me. I definitely believe there are plenty of good actors in the system. I think the system makes itself is corrupt. And so that is the kind of thing that I've been trying to address in my later novels. So my characters, Ellery Hathaway in the first series and Annalisa Vega in the current series, are both, decent people and good cops who are working in a system that isn't necessarily supporting them. And that's kind of how I've made my peace with it, I guess.
Sure. Faye and Bruce, do you want to add anything?
Well, it's just also interesting that we're asking ourselves these questions now. Can we continue to write police procedurals in light of everything that's going on? But the way I feel about it, the same way as Rachel feels about it, this stuff has been going on for a long time. And I didn't approach the book thinking that I was obligated to portray police in a certain kind of way. Even I have never had a good relationship. We grew up very poor. Louisiana, got stopped all the time. And even when I moved to Pleasanton, California, I got stopped all the time. It was 20 years ago. Never particularly, and this is going to sound awful, but I never particularly liked cops or policemen as a monolith, right? That they were just something that I wasn't impressed with. But when I started my book, I didn't think about, especially this latest serial killer book, that, okay, I'm writing about police and I must portray them in a certain kind of way. I went into it thinking, this is my character. These are the flaws that she has. These are the troubles she's getting into because of her blind spots and flaws. And let's see what happens to her. I didn't really think about, oh my goodness, are people, and there is a shooting in my book. She actually, she shoots someone and I have her go through all those feelings of having done that. And I do remember, and I'll go be very quick. One time I was in a leadership class that had a lot of police officers in it. And one of the police officers that I got really close to was saying that, you see all this stuff on TV and you read all this stuff in the paper as to what happens with an officer involved shooting. And he had been involved in one in my hometown. And he said, you don't realize what happens in that person's mind, even if it is, justified or, it's just, I'm not to say that, I'm feeling sorry. It's just really complicated, but he was trying to explain how complicated that was for him. And that's what I look for in stories. I look for the characters, the complications, and how that plays out on the page.
Okay. Bruce, do you want to add anything, or do you want me to go on to the next question?
I'm feeling the love. No, I mean, I think everything that the rest of the panel has raised are all legitimate issues. And I think everybody's experiences in life are different that we write from. Obviously, Rachel and I are from two totally different ends of the country. Her experiences or her friends or family's experiences with the LAPD, I'm sure, are vastly different than my experiences with my own department. And that's not to say that, I don't paint police officers in an unrealistic way either. One of the first questions I remember getting when some of the local media types found out that I was writing the series, and the interview started, they wanted to know whether or not I was going to write, just all good cops, the white hats, and the bad guys who wear the black hats. And I'm like, that's not realistic at all. Why would I do that?
Spoiler alert, he doesn't.
Right. I mean, we're talking about human nature. And, to me, that's one of the things that I always have found fascinating. And I would much rather read books, and do read books, where sometimes it's hard to tell the good from the bad. Everybody's capable of both of those types of things, those activities. I myself have put friends and colleagues that I was very close to in jail for offenses they committed that I worked with. So it would be dishonest, I think, to portray them as anything other than that. I mean, we all struggle. And I think that sometimes makes for some of the most interesting writing.
Now, because I'm very wed to this baseball analogy I've been spinning out, is a curveball. What do you think the hardest part of writing procedurals is? Is it getting the details right, keeping up with evolving forensics, or is it having to build an entire police station full of characters, or something entirely different? Rachel.
I think what Bruce just said is the hardest part, balancing the white hats with the black hats, with the very emotional things, with the reality of what a cop is. I mean, my daughter's best friend's dad is a lieutenant with the LAPD, and he's a great cop. There are two former cops that live, our neighbors, and they're wonderful, lovely, committed people. And yet, their coworkers may not be. So where's that middle? How do you do that without, being dishonest, without cutting corners? For me, it was easy finding out the procedural stuff. I mean, between, I haven't had breakfast with Bruce yet, but I've had, coffee with, other cops, and just picking their brains and reading lots of Miles Corwin. And for me, that was the easy part, but just who these people are as people. I mean, when I first started the Lou Norton series, and you guys, some of you have heard me say this before, I would find especially Black women who were police officers, and I pepper them with like really personal questions, the sex question, the bio questions, like when you're on your period, where do you go when you're at a crime scene? Things like that you cannot learn from Google. I ask those questions because even if I'm not going to use, that particular thing, I want it built into the DNA of who this person is that I'm going to be spending time with. So yeah, I think that's the hardest part, at least for me, is building out these true to life, fully realized folks.
Yeah.
Rachel, let's do breakfast. All right.
I'd love to.
All right. Me too.
Yes.
Anybody else encounter challenges? Yeah, Hillary.
Yeah, I would say it's funny because I think everyone assumes that the forensics are going to be the hardest part, but there are a lot of people that you can talk to. And I mean, to the point where like I'm buddies with a medical examiner who has let me into the morgue in New York and get behind the scenes tour. Like it sounds ghoulish, but it's great if you want to put details in. I remember one of the weird things was a chart on the wall that had organs and numbers next to them, like, brain, liver, heart. And it was a competition among the medical examiners in the office for who found the biggest organs. I mean, it was literally like stuff like that like ghoulish kind of humor that I would not have come up with on my own. Like I needed to, go and research that. But it's not the hard thing. I find the hard thing, I guess maybe, I think Rachel said it really well, but I would add to talk about the toll that policing takes on people on a personal level and how it can interfere with their relationships and gives them the power sometimes to do things in their relationships that maybe wouldn't be the best thing to do. I feel like as a society, we don't talk about that at all, the amount of power that we give law enforcement. It's just kind of unquestioningly handed over. And, there's basically the 201, when I think of cops that I know, they would say, well, I haven't really needed help, but I know cops who need help, like mental kind of help that they're not getting because they would be off the job or on desk duty if they got it. So there's a lot of denial around that. There's a lot of kind of anxiety around that. And I find that fascinating, that there's sort of like so much power, and yet it hangs on this thread of presenting as very tough and able to handle anything. And you see cops making mistakes because of that. You see cops not being able to handle things because of that. So the psychological aspect of sort of what we're asking people to do for their job, you know, versus not supporting, not giving resources. I mean, it's talked about these days largely as the community needs more resources and we need social workers and we need these things. And we do. But I think if we're being honest, we also need to look at cops and say, there's a lot of support that these people need, and maybe a lot of assessment and other things that they're not getting. You know, so that's kind of like, it's just one of the things that troubles me as I write. It's one of the things that makes it impossible for me to do a hero cop, because I'm always thinking about the emotional toll that the job is taking on a person.
Anyone else?
I mean, I'll take a slightly different take that's maybe a little lighter. I agree with everything that Rachel and Hillary said, but I find one of the challenges is the procedure and how much of it to put in. Because it turns out even readers of police procedure aren't usually there for the procedure. And this is something I had to learn, because I find it all really cool and interesting. And I'm like, oh, which form would you use here? You know, kind of stuff. Like, I want the nitty gritty. And I've learned that most readers don't. They really want the story and the atmosphere. So figuring out how much procedure to include so that it feels authentic and realistic without getting bogged down can sometimes be a challenge, I think.
It has occurred to me that procedurals probably like, you never see people doing paperwork, or it's very like, I hate doing paperwork.
Yeah.
But the amount of paperwork that you probably have to do to the amount that we are willing to read about it is, it's very disproportionate. All right.
If I wrote a book that actually reflected the amount of paperwork, you wouldn't want to read it.
Yeah,
it would be very boring.
The Lord of the Rings and that big.
Yes. For one case. Yeah, it's true.
Well, it's one of the things with forensics that kind of bothers me, because you do all of this research and you learn these things, and then everything has to be fudged. Like, no toxicology report is coming back that fast. Those things take weeks and sometimes months. And it's like, yet for the story, we need this back by tomorrow. So you're learning how things work, and then you're lying about all of it because the story could not take place and unfold in this time frame if you were honest. So yeah, that's a little bit weird to do the research and then be like, and now I will make up my own version of it.
This is for me, this is where my day job helps. I am a science fundraising writer. And so I raise money to help advance research, right? And I meet with doctors all the time. Tell me about your cancer research. And they go on and on and on and on. And I'm like, so what's the Twitter version of that? Tell it to me like you're in third grade, because rich people, one, don't have the time to be flipping through all your big words and your elegant science. I'm sorry, what's the Twitter version? And that's basically what I do, you know, for this job. My novel writing is taking all the stuff that we get lost in and boiling it down to the Twitter version so that people can keep flipping the pages. That's what we need them to do.
And in the end, if I have to choose between the story and what's accurate, I choose the story.
Most people do.
Yeah.
All right, Faye, I have a specific question for you.
Ooh.
In A Killing Fire, your detective Raven refuses to wear a body covering suit to a crime scene, and she hides evidence at a murder and lies to her partner about it within the first 30 pages. Did you worry about presenting a good cop as a rule breaker?
And I didn't. I was just trying to present her. This is her. I mean, one thing about this character is that her father was a notorious serial killer. I don't even know if she would have gotten on the force in real life, but her father, and she was kind of dragged into some of that when she was a wee child. But I didn't. I just wanted to present someone who was kind of a loner, kind of very flawed. And then one of the things that I think that interested me about Raven a lot is that she goes through that book and then the next one trying to prove that she is good enough, that she's worthy, even though she's had this very troubled past. So anybody that's like that, and my perception is that they would be trying to keep this, veneer, while at the same time they are a transgressor. And I think that because of my relationship that I've had over the years with police, is that I wouldn't be surprised if many policemen did that. So I didn't really see her as that transgressive, but I guess she's kind of.
Well, I'm going to open this question to all of you because as I was reading your books, I noted multiple instances in which your characters broke police rules at least once. So did you ever have a qualm about the detectives that you were portraying breaking rules or not?
I tried not to have Lou break many rules, if any, because especially being a Black woman in this world, you break a rule and your ass is grass in many ways. So you either are written up, you're called angry. There are repercussions for breaking the rules for us. And in the workspace, especially, it's hard to do that. So I wanted her, if she did break them, it would be very reluctantly and regretfully. She doesn't like seek out, to be a maverick. She is not about being a maverick, but I try to keep her within the lines of reason because I know realistically there are, cuffs on us for our behavior.
Anyone else? Yeah, Hillary.
I would just say, so I did not write my cops as rule breakers, but more as fighters. So you see fighting with, and I don't mean that necessarily in a vicious way, but sort of they have a different take than the department does. You see them fight with, assistant district attorneys, sort of arguing not, for instance, to wrap up a case when the department would very much like to wrap it up, and kind of saying like, just another day, like, let me do this sort of like, so it's more like they have a different perspective and they will advocate for following up on that or for victims. I wouldn't say there's rule breaking. They do, there's certainly other cops that break rules. You definitely get cops breaking rules in my books, but not my pair of lead detectives. And I think I had the same sense that Rachel did, that, there are some people who seem to be able to get away with an awful lot of things and other people who can't get away with putting a foot wrong. And so, you're kind of mindful of that when writing.
Yeah. Hillary and Rachel, in at least one of your police novels, your characters are getting to know their new partners. And there's some very small frictions, maybe some slightly larger frictions in this. How important is the relationship between detectives and partners in your stories? And how do you think about that just in general?
You want to go first, Hill?
Sure. Either way, you want, happy to, but okay. So I did it, I think, as kind of a device. I love keeping readers off balance. That would probably be my favorite thing. And so I didn't want to present Sterling and Mendoza as a kind of pair that they know each other's every thought. And I didn't even want them to trust each other. In the first book with the two of them, One Small Sacrifice, it's really their first case that there's working. And there's a lot of stuff that Sterling and her retired former partner know that they don't really want to let Mendoza in on necessarily. And not for like terribly negative reasons, but it's just like not seeing any value in opening up, cans of worms, or explaining how they know things that, they weren't able to formally bring into the case. So it was really a way of keeping the reader off balance, making them wonder who they should be trusting. My feeling when you're reading is that it's so easy for the reader to take the side of the character that they're reading about. And that's true whether it's a heroic character or like a serial killer. Like there's just this kind of identifying with whoever is on the page. And it was one of the reasons I wanted to flip perspectives and write from different characters' perspectives perspectives so that you don't just have that relationship or trust with one character. But I felt like it was a really good way to sort of just keep things even a little more unsettled. The police, are not a united front because that partnership is new and still forming. So they were not a united front.
And for me, I wanted, Colin is Lou's partner, and he's a young white kid, from Colorado Springs. And I wanted these two Black women are very strong-willed, and white men are very strong-willed, and both think they know everything. And, we actually do, but Colin does. So I wanted to bring that kind of dynamic where you have these two strong personalities. And Colin thinks, because, he's a white man, he knows everything. Here he is in this gentrifying Los Angeles on this case in the Crenshaw area, which is one of the Blackest parts of LA, thinking he knows something, and he does not. And so through Lou, I got to explain to, him, but also to especially white readers, what this part of LA is about, the people here. And how there's one scene in Trail of Echoes where Lou and Colin go and question some young Black teenage girls, and Colin gets upset and offended because they're talking to him in a certain way, and Lou's like, that's just how they talk. It's not about you. That's just their way of communication. And that gave me a chance to, say to the old little white lady who's reading, just because someone's speaking in a tone doesn't mean that they're speaking in a tone. So it served dual purposes. One, for the conflict between the two characters themselves, and having to rely on this person who you kind of don't like, but they're kind of there for you. And then, being able to explain my world, my Los Angeles to readers. That's why I brought Colin in.
Okay, great. Bruce, your Detective Sergeant John Byron is demonstrating some of the most familiar tropes of a detective in your debut, Among the Shadows. He's on the outs with his wife, he drinks too much, and he's pretty repressed about his feelings. So how did you feel about creating a character where you were balancing some sort of known stereotypes with just new and kind of insightful emotions and feelings?
Really, what I set out to do was to try and create the most accurate picture I could for the reader. It's funny because when I first started doing this, I got a lot of advice saying, geez, stay away from the divorced cop, the cop with a drinking problem, having them getting woken up in the middle of the night to go to a murder. And I thought, well, geez, then I'm not writing a detective, I guess, I don't know what I'm writing. So I followed my gut, and I went with what I know to be real. And I thought this was a really good way of being able to present both the good and the bad traits of the men and women that I worked with. I'd seen it all in those 30 years, and everybody's like I mentioned earlier. Everyone is able, and occasionally will do the wrong thing. That's human nature. Mm-hmm. So the fight really becomes, what the rules are, what the law is, and what your goal is. And the question is, can you stay on that straight and narrow and survive a career in spite of all the things that job does to you? And I think John really expresses the best of being a police detective, and also the worst at times. You see that, but he struggles with that and tries to stay on the right side of things, and has very little patience for those that don't. And I think that's pretty telling. And I tell people the only thing that seems similar is I only echo the good parts of John Byron, none of the bad. So if you see anything bad, that's not me. That's fiction. So
that's mastercraft at work. All right. Joanna, All the Best Lies opens with an investigation into the actions of Ellery, who is our main police protagonist, to determine whether she's fit to do her job. So for much of the book, she actually kind of isn't operating in an official police capacity. Did you find that freeing for her? Did you do that intentionally so that you could have her do things that she couldn't do as a police person?
No, not for that reason. It's just that's where the story went after the result of her actions in the first book. Eventually she's cleared and returns to duty, and the series continues. That was done in part because book 3 actually focuses on Reed, who's an FBI agent. So Ellery ends up taking more of a supporting role in book 3 because Reed is pursuing the cold case of his birth mother's murder in Las Vegas, like 40 odd years ago. Mm-hmm. And Ellery goes with Vegas to assist him in his pursuit. But there is some discussion along the way that he's still bound by the rules and she's maybe a little less so right now.
Yep. And actually that leads me to another topic, which is romance, because Reed and Ellery have a romance, which has some stop-starts kind of in that book. They're really working through some stuff that luckily most couples don't have to deal with. We're not dating our kidnapped savior, I guess. At least I hope we aren't.
No,
how do you guys feel about including romance in your books, and do you find it difficult? Do you enjoy it? Do you enjoy reading romantic subplots in police works more than you enjoy writing them, or vice versa? Rachel?
For Colin and Lou, I flirted some with it, but I kept the rule of moonlighting in my head. Remember moonlighting and how we all wanted Dave and Maddie to get together, and they did, and the series went So I keep that in my head. It's like, I don't want to do what moonlighting did, and that just killed everything for me. So I have Lou is in the beginning, she's having marital problems, and Colin's there to kind of coach her through it, and they egg each other about their romances. And of course they do flirt, because I mean, you have two people who literally depend on each other to survive. And you're going into these crazy, sometimes violent situations together. And how can you not feel affection, at least for this person? I mean, I work a desk job and I feel affection for people who come and like make copies for me, you know what I mean? So, and again, talking to women who are on the force, it is a very real thing. It makes total sense. But for me, I kept them apart with kind of a promise, but not really, only because, I watched Moonlighting back in the day.
I can talk about this. I have romantic subplots, I think, to a greater or lesser degree in all of the books. And it's funny because the new one, Gone for Good, which comes out, I think 3 weeks from today, something like that. There is a romantic subplot, and it was recently reviewed on Instagram by a large account. And the person said, I really love this book, except the romance. Like I didn't really like that. I don't like romance in my thrillers. Do you like, and she put it to the audience, do you like romance in your thrillers? And then there's just hundreds of comments from everybody going, yes. Yeah, like, it's great that you don't, person, but yeah, I do. I like overwhelming, like, give me all the romance. There are a few people who are like, I don't mind it, but overwhelmingly, it was like thumbs up for romance. And when I weighed in eventually, I said, yes, I like it because, I mean, love, sex, these are some of the main human motivations. And I feel like if you leave it out entirely, your people don't seem real. Like they should have like romantic interests, or like some of them at least, maybe not all of them. But it should be a part of your story in some way, just to make it seem alive.
Sure. Faye, were you going to say something?
Even if it's off the page, right? I try to keep my romance plot off the page. The first couple books I wrote, Richard T. Marvel's series, was a romantic suspense. And I just became really disinterested in writing that. I like the mystery because of what happens with the crime, the murder, the high stakes. And I also like I would only use romance if it was an integral part of the main mystery, if it made it go, right? Other than that, no, keep it off the page. Yeah.
Okay.
I would just say, like, my attitude about it was sort of like Faye's, to keep it off the page, but to have it in the background. So both Sterling and Mendoza are both happily married people, and their partners do sort of come into it in the background. Mendoza, he's hiding the fact he's married at work because he's gay, and he doesn't feel comfortable about being out at work because, you know, even now that's an issue, even now in New York. So it's a little bit like stuff like that, how they sort of handle issues like that interested me. But there's definitely not like a romantic plot. It just sort of lies in the background of the book. And I think also helps to explain, like, these are two very grounded characters because they have other people to help ground them. And so that was how I thought of it too.
Bruce, how do you feel about the romance?
For me, it's more of a vehicle to try and explore who Diane Joyner and John Byron both are. They're both really reeling from failed relationships prior to this, and they're both doing that. You know, Rachel mentioned this. I mean, they're involved in things that are life and death experiences, and taking up their entire lives. It's really natural for the two of them to start to feel things for each other that they might not, and maybe a different type of workplace. And so they're both very cautious about their relationship. And I'm not sure if at given times one of them may be more committed than the other, but they're really playing fast and loose with what that relationship is, as far as, you know, will either one of them ever commit, or is this just something that's there? If that makes any sense at all.
A little bit of moonlighting in there, Bruce.
Right, there's a little bit of that in there. There's a little bit.
All right, with 1 minute to go, I'm going to ask you a question that you have to answer in 12 seconds because that's how math works. I do math during the day, so this is very within my wheelhouse. Basic math. I think it's very likely that you read or watch crime dramas or read other police procedurals. So in your 12 seconds, are there any you love and would like to recommend?
I always recommend Rachel's. I mean, that's been like, I love Lou Norton, and, you know, just some of the best books that I've read. So I always recommend those to people. So I'm going to go with that. That's my 12 seconds.
Okay.
For me, it's still Ed McBain, like the first and the only, and how he managed to keep a series going for 50 years and the different twists that the characters took. I just love them.
Okay.
I love Don Winslow's stuff. I learned so much of not just about cop work, but people and locations, and it's so rich, and it's the language just sings to me. So he's my choice.
All right. Faye?
Ann Petrie, The Street. If you want to read some from the 1946, just read that right now. Just go.
Oh, I'm sorry, what was the name again?
The Street by
But what was
Ann
the author?
Ann Petrie.
Gotcha. Yeah. All right. Bruce?
James Lee Burke, hands down for me. I've read a lot of different procedurals, and nobody uses the language like he does in a gritty Dave Robichaud procedural. Some of his stuff just rises to the level of poetry, and I don't know how he does that. I'm still in awe. So right. He's the man.
Thank you all so much for joining us together. We did it. It's Bouchercon, but it's wherever you are. And people can watch it wherever they are. It'll be very exciting. So thanks again for all showing up. I appreciate it so much. And I very much enjoyed reading your work and look forward to future books. Thanks all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Great.
Okay.